That day, the beautiful Rapunzel decided to make a cake with her skillful hands. She searched and looked everywhere, but could not find cocoa for the cake. She went to ask for cocoa from the old lady who lived in a cookie house nearby. She stared in admiration at the delicious cinnamon-scented walls and the windows made of sugar and cream. She knocked on the door slowly. The old landlady, who opened the door grumpily, called out,
"Who are you?"
"Hello, Auntie. I'm making a cake. Can I get some cocoa from you?" The old lady's eyes were not seeing very well. She got closer to Rapunzel and stared, complaining.
"Everyone wants the ingredients from me."
She pointed to the cellar downstairs and said,
"My eyes can't see well. Cocoa is on the shelf right at the entrance of the cellar."
She grabbed Rapunzel's arm just as she was about to walk through the door.
"Don't try to go further, okay? The cellar is so big you'll get lost."
Rapunzel could not understand the old lady's strange behavior. When she went down to the cellar, it was so dark and messy that she took a match out of her pocket and lit it. Marshmallows, vanilla, cocoa. Just as she was about to grab the cocoa and leave, she heard whispers from the back of the cellar.
"Shh! Be quiet! I guess it's not the witch!"
Rapunzel, ignoring the old aunt's warning, nervously walked to the back of the cellar and lit another match. At that moment, she couldn't believe her eyes because the two siblings were looking at her with fear from inside the cage.
What's going on? Hansel, Gretel, who locked you in here?
Hansel and Gretel told her that they were very hungry while walking in the forest, and the old aunt tricked them with food.
"She's a witch. She locked us in here. She put the key in her pocket. She's going to make cotton candy out of Hansel."
Rapunzel thought of a good plan to save Hansel and Gretel. She then warned them not to rush and quickly left. She went home and quickly baked a cocoa cake. She spilled some pink powder on it, and without waiting, she grabbed the cake and took it to the old witch.
What should I do with your tasteless cake? I don't want it.
Rapunzel told the old witch that this cake was very good for the eyes.
Really? Well, give it to me and let me try it.
So the witch chewed and chewed. Then she stumbled and fell on the couch.
Is it evening already? Let me sleep for a bit.
It turns out that the pink powder Rapunzel put in the cake was Dream World powder. She took the key from the witch's pocket and immediately went down to the cellar. She freed Hansel and Gretel from the cage and took them out.
"Rapunzel, you saved us from the witch's house!"
"Thank you so much."
I didn't know she was a wicked witch either. From that day on, Rapunzel, Hansel and Gretel told everyone what kind of person the witch was. No child was ever lost in the forest again. While Rapunzel used her intelligence and talent for good, the evil witch got lost in that dream world.
Once upon a time, there was a little girl named Heidi. Due to the loss of her parents, her auntie was taking care of her. But one day, she took Heidi to her grandfather's little hut in the mountains. Grandfather Alm was a grumpy old man who lived in a small hut on the Alps. This was the first time that Heidi saw her grandfather. Telling him that she had found a job in another city, Heidi's aunt left Heidi with her grandfather and returned to the city. Grandfather Alm, who was used to living an isolated life away from people, was actually glad that his granddaughter was there, but did not show it to Heidi. The old man prepared a nice cosy bed in the attic. Heidi loved her grandfather from the first sight, and happy times were about to begin for her in the mountains. When she woke up in the morning, she was introduced to her grandfather's very big dog, Joseph. Heidi loved Joseph. Then one day, when she was hiking on the hills, she met Peter the shepherd, who was grazing his goats on the meadows.
I haven't seen you around here before.
Yes, I just arrived. I'm going to live here with my grandfather from now on.
In the following days, Peter started to take Heidi with him to graze his goats in the meadows. They started to hike together in the mountains. Everything was so new and exciting for Heidi. She learnt a lot from Peter about how to be a shepherd. Even though he didn't show it much, Grandfather Elm loved Heidi very much. Running around and having fun on the fields all day long, Heidi was very happy, but she also never forgot to help her grandfather with the housework. And one of her favourites was to bake little bread in her grandfather's wood oven. She used to take the bread she made to Peter's grandmother, and Peter's grandmother would give her fresh goat's milk in return. One day, summer was over and it was winter time. When Peter started to go to school, Heidi was left alone and eventually got bored. She was really upset that she was too small to go to school like Peter. One day, Heidi's aunt came back to take Heidi to the city. She was going to get homeschooling and work. Grandfather Elm was very upset at first and did not accept it, but when he thought about it, he realised that it would be best for Heidi to stay in the city and learn to read and write.
I love my grandfather,
fussed Heidi. But she was convinced to go after her aunt promised her that she would be back on the mountains after a short while. Her aunt and Heidi arrived to a big mansion after a long train ride.
Wow! What a big house! I'm going to stay here?
Heidi met Clara, the little girl in the house. Clara could not walk because of an accident she had when she was a little child. Her aunt actually brought Heidi to this house to keep Clara company. Clara and Heidi got along really well and became best of friends. Not knowing much about the urban life, Heidi was making Clara laugh with her silly mistakes. Clara's grandmother was a very tough and strict lady.
Get up, you lazy girl. It's time to study. You still have a lot to learn.
Clara's grandmother was trying to teach Heidi a lot, from how to sit and stand up properly and how to use a knife and fork at the dinner table. And Heidi was even dressing like the ones who live in the city. But she wasn't feeling very comfortable in these dresses. Clara also helped Heidi to learn to read and write. Heidi did like being here with Clara and all, but she missed the mountains and her grandfather far too much. Heidi could not even eat because of her sadness. Her heart was full of longing. Clara's father and grandmother realized Heidi's sadness. After a while, they decided to send her next to her grandfather. But Clara was very sad because Heidi was leaving.
To truly love someone means to want their happiness at all costs,
said grandmother. At last it was time to say goodbye. While Heidi was leaving, her aunt told her that Clara was going to come and visit her in the mountains next year. Happy to be back in the mountains, she first stopped by Peter's house on her way home and gave the bread Clara sent to Peter's grandmother. Leaving her fancy dress behind, she went running home and hugged her grandfather as tight as she could. And they were happy again. A while later, Heidi was high in the clouds with happiness because of the letter she received saying that Clara was going to visit her soon. When in the Alps, Clara liked Peter a lot, but Peter was a bit hesitant because he was afraid that Heidi was going to go back to the city with Clara. Clara, Peter and Heidi were having the time of their lives on the hills. The fresh mountain air and natural foods were really good for Clara. But Peter started to get really jealous of Heidi because of her close friendship with Clara. Peter also did not like to carry Clara to her wheelchair and push her around. One day, he pushed Clara's wheelchair off from a cliff. He thought that this would solve everything. Without her wheelchair and the fresh mountain air, Clara became much stronger, and she even started to walk slowly with Heidi's help. After a while, she started to take steps with no one's help.
I can walk! Yay, Heidi! I owe this to you!
One day, Clara's father and grandmother came to visit, and when they saw Clara walking, they couldn't believe their eyes. They gave their thanks to Grandfather Alm and Heidi. At that moment, Peter felt really sorry about what he had done. He confessed to pushing Clara's wheelchair off the cliff.
I apologize to all of you. What I did was so very wrong.
We forgive you, right, Clara? Even though what you did was wrong, we are all happy that she's walking now.
They all laughed with joy. Clara and her family promised to come back next summer, and they all lived happily ever after. It was a cold and snowy New Year's night. The people were passing by with their warm coats, gloves and scarves. They were all in a rush to get somewhere. Some were late and rushing to get home, and some were going to a venue to celebrate the new year. Children were running around on the streets throwing snowballs to each other. Of course, they were the ones enjoying the snow the most. They were playing with each other and laughing hysterically. But on the streets, there was a girl, different than the ones that were playing. This little girl was standing in the middle of the street, watching the other kids play. She did not have a hat to protect her from the cold like others. Her clothes were light and ripped, and the slippers on her feet didn't fit her right. They were big. She was holding a box in her hands, shivering from the freezing cold. The little girl barely noticed a car coming right at her.
Hey kids, stay on the side of the road, you're gonna get run over!
The little girl threw herself on the sidewalk that second. But while she was running, the very big slippers on her feet flew off. When she was on the sidewalk, she turned around and looked. She saw a boy running with her slippers. "My slippers!" She yelled and ran after him, but the kid ran away fast. "Hey, stop!" Having no choice but to walk barefoot, she sought for a shelter next to a wall. She opened the box she had been holding and she put it down. She was looking in the box full of matches with her eyes watery from the cold. This was a little match girl, but she could not even sell one box of matches that day. If she could make a sale and earn some money, she could go home and have at least a bowl of warm soup with her mother. So she started yelling with her thin, shivering voice from cold and sadness. "Matches! Matches! Anyone wants matches? Matches!" Nobody on the street paid any attention to her, so she sat down next to the wall. Her fingers started to ache from the cold. She could not bear the pain anymore. Somehow, she had to warm up. She opened a box and pulled out a match. Her fingers were numb, and she could barely hold a match. With her shivering hands, she lit the match on the wall, and suddenly a warm orange light surrounded her. Poor girl passed the match from one hand to the other to warm her fingers. Her hands were not cold anymore. She found herself in front of a burning stove. She stared at the fire and started dreaming. She was sitting in front of a big stove in a beautiful room. She had a woolen sweater on her, furry boots on her feet, and a beanie on her head. It was so hot she began to sweat. But suddenly, the match went out. With the match out, those sweet dreams also vanished. Her little fingers began to freeze and ache once again. She lit up another match. At that moment, a cold wind blew. The little girl turned to the wall to keep the match from going out, and she covered the fire with her hands. Whilst she was looking at it, the wall suddenly vanished and opened up. There was a big room inside. There were all sorts of food spread on a table with a white cloth, and the silver candlesticks on the table lit up the room like daylight. She stared at the table and saw that in the middle of the table there was a beautifully grilled big piece of meat. She immediately ripped a piece of it and put it in her mouth. Suddenly, she wasn't hungry anymore. The little match girl wanted to take another piece of meat. She reached out, but the match she had in her hand went out pretty fast. Poor girl's hand burned and she threw the match away.
Ow! Ow!
As soon as she threw away the match, the feast on the table and the room vanished. The wall reappeared. Little match girl lit another match. Now she was in an even bigger dream. She was sitting under a tree on a summer night, looking at the stars above. It was still warm, even though it was night time. The little girl could not take her eyes off of the stars. She never saw the sky and the stars so clear and sparkling before. Then suddenly, she saw a shooting star. She thought to herself, "There goes another one of us flying into eternity." These are actually her grandmother's words. At that moment, she saw her grandmother appear.
When you see a shooting star, know that someone will take its place, my dear.
Her grandmother was visible for a brief moment, and then when she disappeared, the little match girl called after her.
Grandmother, stop! Don't go! Don't go, please! I really missed you!
To see her grandmother one more time, she lit up another match. She forgot how she was freezing from cold in the middle of the street and started dreaming once again. Every time she lit up a match, she felt as if she was seeing her grandmother and hearing her voice. The little girl lit up another match. Her surroundings lit up like daylight. She never saw her grandmother this beautiful before. Her loving face made her forget all the cold and bitter days she had ever been through. She did not want this moment to finish, so she lit up the final match in a hurry. Her grandmother appeared in front of her again. She reached out her arms to hold the little match girl's hand. They started to fly up into the sky together. The little girl felt a sudden relief. There was no cold or hunger anymore. At that moment, another shooting star went on by. In the morning, the people who passed by on the street saw the little match girl laying down by the wall. Her eyes closed, but with a sweet smile on her face. She had a lot of burnt matches around her. The matches which, with their flames, brought her dreams alive that no one would ever dream about. Once upon a time, there lived a king who had 12 beautiful daughters. These 12 princesses lived all together in a big, beautiful room. The king protected his daughters with his heart, and when they went to bed at night time, he did not allow them to go out. But every morning, they would wake up to something very strange. The shoes of the princesses would all be worn out as if they had danced all night long. The king had to buy his daughters new shoes every day. But the following days after, the shoes just kept wearing out. Neither the king nor his men in the castle could solve the mystery of the shoes.
How is this even possible? How can a pair of shoes worn out like that in just one night? Your Highness, we can't understand.
Finally, the king said,
Whoever solves the mystery of my daughter's shoes will get to marry whichever daughter of mine he chooses, become my son-in-law, and get to be the king when I pass away. But he has 3 days and 3 nights to solve it. Otherwise, he will spend his life in prison.
Many young men in the kingdom and even princes from other kingdoms came to the castle for the job. For days they guarded the door of the 12 princesses' bedroom. But after some time, none of them could solve the mystery. And shoes continued to wear out by the night. Finally, a good-hearted young man also wanted to give it a shot. And so he made his way to the castle. On his way, he met a lanky old lady who looked very poor. "My dear child, I'm very hungry. Would you be kind enough to give me a piece of bread?" The young man gave all the food he had in his bag to the old lady. She was very happy because the previous men who had passed didn't give anything. The old woman knew that this one was different than the others. So, in return, she gave him a magic cape. "Take this magic cape. When you wear it, you will be invisible. When it strikes 12 o'clock at night, put the cape on, be invisible, and get in the princess's room. This way you can solve the mystery of the shoes. But be aware, do not drink what the princesses give you. No, those nasty princesses." The young man took the magic cape and went to the castle. And when he arrived, he said that he was there to solve the mystery of the shoes. First day, when he was keeping guard in front of the princess's room, the oldest princess came out with a glass of lemonade. "You must be thirsty. We have prepared some lemonade for you. Please, have some." The young man forgot about the old lady's warning and drank it. Soon after, he was very sleepy. He fell asleep, snoring all night in the room that they had prepared for him. When it was morning, the young man stood up in a panic.
I was supposed to wear the magic cape and get in the princess's room.
On the second night, the young man once again kept guard in front of the princess's room. This time, another princess came out with a glass of juice in her hand. The young man was so thirsty while keeping guard and waiting for the nightfall. Without thinking, he drank all the juice that had been given to him. And of course, dozed off once again. The next morning when he woke up, he finally remembered the old lady's words. "But be aware, do not drink what the princesses give you."
There must be a sleeping pill in the drinks the princesses give me.
At that moment, the king came next to him.
2 days have gone by and you still haven't solved the mystery of the shoes. If you cannot do it today, you will end up in prison and stay there for the rest of your life.
The king finished his talk and went away. The young man had to solve this mystery today. That night, for the last time, the young man kept guard in front of the princess's door. This time, the youngest princess came out with an orange juice in her hand. But the young man was aware now. He took the glass, thanking the princess, and when the princess left, he poured the orange juice in a pot next to him. This time round, he was standing tall. The night fell and soon it was midnight. The young man put his cape on and at that moment became invisible. Slowly he opened the door and could not believe what he was seeing. All of the princesses were wearing their most beautiful ball gowns, hair and makeup done with their very new shoes. Let's see if the young man at the door has fallen asleep. One of the princesses opened the door and looked outside, and another princess put her ear on the wall. At that moment, the young man knew that he had to make some snoring noises. The oldest princess pushed her bed aside and clapped her hands 3 times. A secret passage opened in the place of the bed. The young man could not believe his eyes. One by one, all the princesses walked inside. And of course, the young man followed. The secret passage was opening to a stairway which had hundreds of steps going down. When they were going down the stairs, at one point the young man accidentally stepped on one of the princess's skirts. Oh, somebody stepped on my skirt! Oh, nonsense. It was probably you. When the stairs had finished, they came into a forest. They went past tall trees with beautiful silver branches. The young man took a branch and kept following the princesses. After another long walk, they stopped on the edge of a river. In the river, there were 12 boats in the shape of swans, and in them there were 12 princes waiting for the princesses. They got on the boats, and the young man got on the last one. The boat seems heavier than usual today, as if another person is on it. Strange. Oh, come on, stop dreaming. When they crossed the river, they came across a big shiny castle, and they could hear music coming from inside. When he looked through the window, the young man saw many people dancing. As soon as they entered the castle, the princesses started to dance. They would never get tired and just kept on dancing. Of course, their shoes started to wear out. The young man could not bear his hunger anymore, so he took a slice of cake on the table and started to eat. The youngest princess saw this. Hey, my cake! My cake is floating as if someone invisible is eating it! Come on, stop it with this nonsense. The young man took a golden cup from the table without anyone noticing. The princesses danced till the morning. Then they got on the boats, crossed the river, walked through the forest, walked up the very long staircase, and finally they came back to their castle. But their shoes were all worn out, once again. The young man was very happy that he had finally solved the mystery of the worn-out shoes. A while later, the king came next to the young man.
Your time is up today. Did you solve the mystery of the shoes?
Yes, Your Highness, I did.
And so he told him everything. The king didn't believe him at first. But when the young man showed him the silver branch from the forest and the golden cup from the shining castle, the king knew he was telling the truth. And so he kept his promise and granted him the right to marry whichever princess he chose. The young man said that he wanted to marry the youngest one. The 12 dancing princesses were clearly not happy because their secret was out now. But the young man and the youngest princess got married and lived happily ever after. Once there lived a family not too far out from where we all lived. The Darling family. The Darling family had 3 children. Their names were Jan, Michael and Wendy. Wendy would always tell her mum how Peter Pan would always play the flute in her room. Her mother would always tell her that she was imagining things, but couldn't help but notice the leaves in the room, which always confused her a bit. Wendy would always say that the leaves fall off Peter Pan. One night, when their parents went out for the night, the kids were left home all alone, and when they got sleepy, they all went to sleep. Peter Pan silently entered their room and started looking for the leaves he had left behind. At that moment, Wendy woke up. Peter Pan, I was waiting for you. Nobody would believe that you're real. Wendy gave back the leaves she had been hiding for Peter. She really liked Peter, and so they sewed his leaves back on his clothing.
Wendy, would you like me to tell you an amazing adventure story?
I don't want to hear about an adventure. I want to live one, Peter Pan. Right at that moment, Peter's small fairy friend, Tinkerbell, entered through the window.
Well, of course. I knew you'd be here. Are you getting ready for a new adventure without me?
You know it's not possible for me to do anything without you.
Wendy woke her siblings up. Her siblings looked at Peter Pan and Tinkerbell with great confusion.
Well, are you ready to fly?
Tinkerbell scattered her fairy dust and off they went floating into thin air, and all together they left the house. The kids headed towards Neverland at once. After a long journey, they arrived at Neverland, and there they were. The mermaids, wild animals, Indians, pirates, and the lost boys were there too. Amongst them all was the most dangerous of them, called Captain Hook. Captain Hook was Peter Pan's enemy. The reason for this was because when they were fighting, Peter cut his arm and a huge crocodile ate it. Along with his arm, he also swallowed his watch, and because of this, the crocodile would always make a tick-tock noise. And so Captain Hook would always know if the crocodile was near from the noise. When looking around with his binoculars on the deck, Captain Hook spotted Peter Pan and kids looking at him from the top of a hill. He immediately ordered the men to fire the cannons. It was very hard for Peter Pan and the kids to get away from the cannons.
Tinkerbell, you take the kids to a safe place. I will deal with Hook.
Tinkerbell was very jealous of Wendy, so she wanted to keep her away from Peter Pan. With some made-up excuse, she left Wendy back on the hill and brought Jan and Michael to a safe place down at the beach.
The lost boys who lived on the island saw Wendy from afar, and thinking that she was an enemy, they wounded her. At the same time, Peter Pan was fighting with Captain Hook, but seeing the crocodile that got his arm suddenly reappearing, Hook ran away in fear.
Ah! Whilst Peter Pan was coming back, he saw Wendy lying on the rocks wounded, and he was very upset.
And the lost boys were very sorry when they realized that the girl that they had wounded was Peter Pan's friend.
I have left the kids in your care.
Tinker Bell was so sorry. She also realized that what she did was wrong.
I am so sorry, Peter. This will never happen again, I promise.
Lost Boys made a beautiful home for Wendy and her brothers. At night, they all would sleep in the house underneath the trees, listening to Wendy's stories. And Peter Pan would keep guard in front of the house. One day, when they were resting on the rocks, they spotted the pirates approaching. The pirates took the Indian chief's daughter hostage. Peter Pan and the boys went after to save the chief's daughter. And there was a big battle between them and the pirates. In the end, they saved his daughter and brought her to the chief. After that day, the Indians, Peter Pan, and the Lost Boys became very close friends. In fact, the chief ordered 2 of his best men in Peter Pan's command to guard the boys. Of course, Captain Hook was furious about this.
One day I will beat you, Peter Pan, and you will not be able to get away.
One night, when Wendy started to tell the story of her family, Peter realized how much she and her brothers missed their home. So he told them that they could go back if they wanted to, but that he wanted to stay. When they all were packing up for their long journey, they were attacked by the pirates. The pirates caught the boys after they set up a trap to the Indians and captured them. Peter Pan was sleeping at home, not knowing all that happened to the boys. Captain Hook saw him sleeping, but he could not open the door to Peter Pan's treehouse. Still, he poured the poison in the bottle he was carrying under the door, causing Peter Pan to sleep for hours. Peter Pan slept one whole day, and when he woke up, Tinker Bell entered. After she told him all that had happened, Peter Pan and Tinker Bell went out to rescue the boys. When they arrived to the Happy Rock, the pirates' headquarters, they saw that there was no pirate on guard. And when they went over to the other side of the rock, they were shocked from what they saw. Wendy, Jan, and Michael and the Lost Boys were all tied up to the poles, and Captain Hook was holding a torch in flames.
Say your last words.
As their eldest, Wendy began to talk.
Dear friends, my last words to you will be the words your real mothers would have told you. If they were here, they would have told you not to be afraid and be courageous to face your death. Don't be afraid. Kindness always wins. Always.
Captain Hook got very angry with Wendy's words, so he brought her to the boat and tied her to the big pole. At this moment, Peter Pan and Tinker Bell reached out to save the boys. At the same time, the Indians and their chief came to help. This made Peter Pan so happy, because with their help, they rescued the boys. It was now time to get Wendy. Peter Pan and the Lost Boys got on Captain Hook's ship, where only a few pirates remained. And when they realized that they would be beaten, they jumped off the ship.
There's nowhere to hide, Hook. Surrender!
Peter Pan and the Lost Boys started to charge towards Captain Hook, pushing him to walk backwards, and suddenly he heard the noise, the one noise that he was most afraid of. When Captain Hook looked back in fear, he saw the croc waiting for him to fall down into the water.
Help!
In a flash, he ran to the other side of the boat, jumped and started to swim as fast as he could. Peter Pan and the Lost Boys began to laugh. From that moment on, Hook's ship belonged to the Lost Boys and their captain was Peter Pan.
The crew is ready for your orders, Captain Peter.
Sail away!
The boys untied the ropes and the sails blew up with all their might.
Tinkerbell, fly us away to the home of the Darling family.
The kids were very happy to hear this. Wendy, Jan and Michael were going to reunite with their parents they had dearly missed. When Tinkerbell sprinkled the fairy dust, suddenly the ship was airborne and started to fly in the sky. Wendy was restless to get home and tell her parents all about Peter Pan, Tinkerbell and the Neverland. From that day on, Neverland was going to be their second home and Peter Pan their best friend.
With her golden hair, always smiling face, Pollyanna was a 10-year-old little girl spreading joy around her. But she had lost her parents when she was really young and was left all alone. For some time, she stayed in the orphanage. After some time had passed, her wealthy aunt accepted to look after her. Her aunt, Miss Polly, prepared the small attic for Pollyanna. The housemaid Nancy was really happy about this. Hopefully our little guest will be successful in cheering up grumpy Miss Polly. When arrived at home, Pollyanna was crying with happiness. She hugged her auntie around her neck, but her auntie was somewhat serious. She took Pollyanna and showed her to her room. Pollyanna was stunned when she saw the size and the wealth of this house. Her auntie showed her room in the attic.
This is your room, and dinner starts at 6 p.m. Don't forget.
Pollyanna liked her room very much. Having seen all the other rooms in the house, Pollyanna did not bother to think once as to why her auntie gave her the room in the attic. Right at 6 o'clock, Miss Polly sat at the dinner table, but Pollyanna had not arrived yet.
Where is this girl?
Would you like me to go and call her, Miss Polly?
No.
After dinner, Miss Polly went over to her room and noticed the room was empty. She immediately went over to the garden to tell the gardener that she was missing. The gardener, on the other hand, pointed over to a rock on the hill. She was over there. In a rush, Nancy ran over to Pollyanna and together they made their way to the villa. Didn't matter what the situation was, Pollyanna always managed to keep a positive attitude about everything. This left Nancy amazed. She asked Pollyanna what the secret to this was.
The glad game. My father taught me this. When I was young, a very helpful lady once sent us crutches. When I asked as to why, she said, so that as long as they were in our sight, we would be able to appreciate the fact that we didn't need to use them and be glad. It is because of that day that whenever me and Daddy feel like we're in doubt, we think of that day and we find a reason to be glad.
Further into the evening, Pollyanna was in her room, on her bed, crying hysterically.
Father! My father who lives amongst the angels! I'm trying to play our game, you know that. But if you were stuck in an attic, in the dark, sitting all by yourself, you too would find it hard to be glad.
The following day, Pollyanna went downstairs to the garden and hugged her auntie.
Auntie! Beloved Auntie! This morning I am so grateful to be alive.
Is that how we say good morning?
After having said this, Aunt Polly turned around and left. Watching them from afar, the old gardener's eyes went watery. He then went over to Pollyanna and told her how much she looked like her mother. Knowing that the gardener knew her mother made her happy. As time went on by, Pollyanna's life at the villa had gotten better. She would have her breakfast, then straight after, start doing her homework with her auntie. And then after lunch, she would have free time until 6 o'clock. She would even do some of the grocery shopping for the house. One day, in the town, she saw a man wearing a long black coat with a cylinder-shaped hat. Although she tried being friends with him, she couldn't make much sense out of what the man was saying to her. Some time had passed and she saw the same man again. She tried to talk to him once again. This time round, he too made conversation with her. Nancy was in shock because although the man, Mr. Pendleton, was very wealthy, he lived in a huge house all by himself and never ever did he speak to anyone. The following day, Pollyanna went home with a very weak dog. Miss Polly didn't say a word. But the following day after that one, she brought a boy home and Miss Polly was extremely cross with her.
Enough, Pollyanna. Amongst all the other hideous things you've done, this is by far the worst. As if it wasn't enough that you brought all the cats and dogs from the streets, now you're bringing beggars to my house.
I'm not a beggar, madam.
After having said that, the boy rushed out of the house, but Pollyanna was determined to save this kid from the streets. In September, Pollyanna started school. It didn't take long for Pollyanna to like her school. One day, during a visit, Mr. Pendleton asked Pollyanna not to leave and if she could stay with him. Of course, it was impossible for Pollyanna to give an answer. Mr. Pendleton explained everything to Pollyanna.
Back when I was young, I fell in love with your mom. I loved her dearly. But your mom never loved me back. Then soon later, she married your father, and they moved away from the city.
Ever since that day, Mr. Pendleton always seemed to be upset towards the world around him. He would always have a long face. But having Pollyanna look like her mother with her sincere looks made it possible for him to look at the world in a more positive manner. This way, by having Pollyanna next to him all the time, he would have a reason to live.
Move next to me, and together we will be happy. You can see me as a father, and I'll see you like a daughter.
But although her auntie didn't show it, she knew she loved her very much. And she didn't want to leave her auntie. She didn't know how to tell this to Mr. Pendleton. At last, she found a solution. She wanted Mr. Pendleton to take Jimmy in, the kid her aunt refused to look after, and thought this way both Mr. Pendleton and Jimmy would be happy, and Pollyanna could visit them both more often. Mr. Pendleton asked for them to come together the following week. But after a few days, a very unfortunate accident happened. A car hit Pollyanna. After opening her eyes a day later in the hospital, Pollyanna was very happy to be alive. She didn't want her auntie to leave her side. She was living the happy moment of her auntie calling her my darling. A few days later, Pollyanna had left the hospital, but she could no longer use her legs. When Mr. Pendleton visited Pollyanna, he told Miss Polly about his offer to Pollyanna and how she rejected the offer due to her auntie. After hearing this story, Miss Polly's love suddenly grew much bigger for her. Just so that her niece would be happy, she would allow the cats and dogs to go up to her room. She would allow anything that made Pollyanna happy. The doctor that they had been waiting for from the city came 1 week late. After Pollyanna's checkup, the doctor had to give the bad news.
Unfortunately, this young girl will not be able to walk.
Oh no! After hearing this, Miss Polly began to cry and soon after fainted. After hearing her auntie's voice, Pollyanna began to cry hysterically. Right then, everyone was waiting for bitter, sad days. Everyone was shedding away their tears for her. Pollyanna began to tell everyone that visited her about the glad game. In order to make Pollyanna happy, Mr. Pendleton decided to adopt Jimmy. When Pollyanna heard the good news, she was so happy. Miss Polly couldn't believe that she was the only one that didn't know the glad game. Once she began talking to Nancy, she found out about everything. She then quickly rushed over to Pollyanna. So, the glad game. From now on, we will play this game together.
Yay! This is by far the best news, Aunt Polly.
Meanwhile, Mr. Pendleton's doctor wanted to see Pollyanna, but there was one problem. Due to an argument they had many years ago with Miss Polly, he hadn't stepped a foot into that house for 15 years. In the end, both ends had come to an agreement and they took her to a hospital out of the city. Mr. Pendleton's doctor looked after Pollyanna and said that there is hope. A few months had passed. Auntie Polly received a letter from Pollyanna.
Dearest Aunt Polly, I have great news. My therapy has ended with great results. At last, I can walk. The doctors here say that I can return home soon. Wish I could walk the way back. Oh, how happy I am. Everything makes me happy. In fact, I'm even happy that I couldn't use my legs for some time. Because if it didn't happen, I would never appreciate them as much as I do now. Hoping to see you soon. With love, Pollyanna.